One of the most enigmatic stories in the Torah appears in this week's Torah portion, Beha'aloscha. Near the end of the parsha, Torah tells us the following, very cryptic story. Miriam and Aaron spoke critically about Moshe, and it concerned the Ethiopian woman that he had married. He had married a woman, Ethiopian woman. They said, this is what Miriam and Aaron said, "Has God only spoken to Moshe? Hasn't he spoken to us too?" And God heard. The man Moshe was extremely humble, more so than any person on the face of the earth. God suddenly appeared to Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, and said, "Go out, all three of you, to the tent of meeting." And the three of them went out. God came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent, and he called out, "Aaron, Miriam," and they both went away. And he said, so that Moshe should not hear the words of praise about himself. That's added in, insert from the commentary. "Please listen to my words. When someone among you experiences prophecy, God will make myself known to him in a vision, or I will speak to him in a dream. But this is not the case with my servant Moshe. Among my entire household, he is trusted. It was I who told him, mouth to mouth, in a vision. He gazes at the image of God. So why were you not afraid to speak about my servant, about Moshe?" And God became angry with them, and he left. And then Miriam was afflicted with tsaras, with a skin disease, which required her to be isolated for a week. What exactly is going on over here? They speak critically of Moshe. It doesn't say what it was. It's about this Ethiopian woman. Who is this woman that the Torah is talking about, that Moshe married? And what do they say? Did God only speak to Moshe? What is that? What do they mean by that? Okay, so God spoke to them as well. Big deal. What do they say disparaging about Moshe? And then the Torah says, you should know, Moshe was very humble. And then God gets involved directly, and he tells them that Moshe is different from all other prophets. That I speak to him face to face, mouth to mouth. Okay, so Moshe was great and greater than the other prophets. But what exactly was going on over here? This is one of the many stories in the Torah that are cryptic, and the only way you can understand it is with the oral interpretation passed down orally and then put into writing in the Talmud Midrash, and then later on Rashi copies what was said before to explain this anomalous passage. This is exactly what happened. Right before this, the Torah talks about how there were two prophets, two people who were saying prophecies. And Rashi tells us that when it was identified, these two people, Eldad and Medad, Moshe's wife, Tzipporah, who was nicknamed the Ethiopian for reasons we won't go into right now, she got upset. She felt bad. And she says to Miriam, heard her say it, "Woe to the wives of these two men." And Miriam says, what's wrong? What did they do wrong? He says, well, now that they're prophets, they're going to have to get divorced from their husbands. Because if you're a prophet, you can't be married. Well, why would she say that? So Miriam says, where are you taking that from? She said, well, as soon as Moses, after Mount Sinai, he separated from me. He became celibate. And Miriam said indignantly, why would he do that? I'm also a prophet. My brother Aaron is a prophet, and we didn't have to separate. We didn't separate. So they felt it was presumptuous on Moses' part to feel that he was different. In response to that, the Torah says, no, don't think that Moses did anything out of his arrogance or his self-promotion, his self-importance. He was the most humble man on the face of the earth. So God explained, because the reason why Moses had to be celibate, the age of 80, by the way, is because Moses' prophecy was different from any other and all other prophets. Every other prophet, no matter how great they were, could not receive prophecy at will. They can do it in their sleep. They would go into a trance. It would only be at designated times. So they had time and the opportunity to engage in a marital life. Moses was different. Moses, I would speak to him directly like you were talking to your friend, and whenever I wanted to talk to him, day or night, it made no difference. He was there, and I was with him, and he was with me. And therefore, he was on call 24/7, and he could not engage in any type of marital life. So don't talk against Moses. He's qualitatively different. That's the way our sages explain this very enigmatic story. But I have a question over here. Yes, granted that the Torah doesn't tell us the details in every part of the Torah. That's why we have an oral Torah, Torah Sheba'al Peh. This is one of the proofs that there is an oral Torah, because without the oral Torah, much of the Torah would be unintelligible, like this story. Another prime example that is given in the very beginning of Genesis, we know that Adam and Eve had 3 sons, and Cain was married, he had children. Who did he marry? And it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, but the oral Torah tells us that they were born with twin sisters and they married their sisters. We're not going to go into how are they allowed to marry sisters. That's a different subject. But there's so many other stories like this that you need the oral Torah. And one of the reasons that the Torah, the written Torah, was written cryptically is to guarantee that we will always have to depend on the oral Torah. But my question here is, why this particular story about Moses was left to the oral Torah? And if you just read the Bible, the scriptures as it's called, you would never get this information. You would never guess this information. Perhaps one simpler understanding is that if the Torah had written, and which seems to be the main point of this whole story, that Moses was celibate, people would have said, you know what, we always have to look to emulate our leaders. We have to try to become like them to the extent that is possible. Certain things are beyond us, we understand, but we have to try our best. It would have been considered an ideal to be celibate. True, the Torah doesn't require it, but if I want to be a more holy person, I will be celibate, just like Moses. So the Torah hides that fact and leaves it for us to read in the oral tradition so that we do not get that wrong impression that celibacy is an ideal in Judaism, because indeed it is not an ideal in Judaism. If a person says, I want to be the holiest Jew I can be, we would never tell the person to not get married. And the reason why Judaism does not have this view of celibacy as an ideal as is found in other religions is because of several reasons. Number one, Judaism never espoused the idea that the ultimate goal in this life is to divorce yourself from the physical world. The Torah did not want us to become ascetic. Sometimes it might be necessary to a person to abstain. A Nazir, we just read about it last week. A Nazir is someone who takes a vow not to drink wine because the person may have been into many different types of temptations, and this is a way of curbing it. It's a temporary, as Tosfos commentary says, it's a little sin to become a Nazir, to abstain, but it's sometimes necessary. It's a necessary evil. It's like taking a medication that has side effects, but you need it for a better outcome that you wouldn't have if you didn't take the medicine. But Judaism never glorified asceticism, and therefore the idea that the highest ideal is to be divorced, to be celibate, is not a Jewish ideal. Number two, and more importantly, the whole goal of Judaism is to change the world, to make the whole world a godly world. In order to do that, we need our soul. Our soul has a lot of spiritual power, but when is our soul complete? When we get married. The Zohar says that marriage is the reunion of two half souls that were separated at birth. And marriage is where they come back together and we become whole. Now, it doesn't mean a single person who never got married for reasons that are beyond his control. They wanted to get married, they couldn't. It doesn't mean that they're defective, because we can always develop collateral channels to get more spiritual energy, and God doesn't give a person a test that they can't endure. He doesn't tyrannize over us, the Talmud tells us. But the ideal for a person is to be married, so that way you have two half souls united together with their collective power, and that empowers you to change the world, to make the world a godly world. So marriage is actually what facilitates your ability to fulfill your mission. And thirdly, marriage is not just a medium to fulfill your mission. Marriage is the mission. The whole idea of God, why God created us, is to fuse, to bring a synthesis between the godly and the physical. That's dramatized and that's practiced and experienced primarily through marriage. The whole idea of God giving us the Torah is called a marriage. And when we get married, it's a replica, and it's more than a replica. We're actually generating the divine, the cosmic marriage between God and the Jewish people and the whole world. And ultimately, in the coming of Mashiach, that marriage will be consummated, it'll be complete, and marriage will be seen in a completely different, more even a higher level of light, of energy, of positivity. It will be put on a higher pedestal. So Judaism not only doesn't encourage celibacy, it strongly discourages it for the reasons that I mentioned and other reasons as well. And that is perhaps why the Torah, even though it's talking about the central theme here is about Moses' celibacy, it leaves out that story, that part of the story, and instead focuses on Moses' humility, on Moses' closeness to God, available 24/7. So we can learn lessons. We can't be like Moses totally, but we can emulate him in that regard, not the regard of celibacy.